Hello, my name is Miriam and I am a Minneapolis-based dye artist. Today I will be talking about how I evolved Madmere Dye into a slow fashion and eco-conscious based business. I found this shirt at thredUP, which is an online thrift store, and I thought it would be a great shirt to do a reverse dye. During COVID, I started researching what are some things that we could do at home that would still be like enriching to my daughter and weren't just like, let's clean the bathroom, let's fold the laundry. I was really looking for things that were not chores and that was not school related, but was still creating something and learning a skill. I placed an order for a couple of Procyon dye colors just to see if we liked it. They weren't big, it was just like the little jars. Procyon dye is what I use to do the ice dyeing that I do. And we tried both liquid and ice dyeing, and it didn't even matter what we were dyeing. My husband had some undershirts, so we dyed those. My daughter loved it. We were making shirts for my mom. And when we ran out of items to dye, because we were living in intentional community, even though we were quarantining and everyone else was quarantining, we asked our neighbors if they had any old shirts that we could dye. I started experimenting on my own, and I started to fall in love with ice dye. The shirts that my neighbors gave us, a lot of them were really old undershirts, had like armpit stains, so it was okay if they did not turn out very well. This was COVID times. It was really intense. We needed something to do. I really stepped out of my comfort level and I started making mandalas on shirts and all sorts of different ties. And then it really just evolved into what I'm doing now. Results. I found this shirt at a thrift store and I've been really wanting to try a reverse dye. This shirt is super soft, but it was difficult to spiral because of that. I'm removing the color without white braid and I am wearing a safety mask because this stuff has a lot of particles that you do not want in your lungs. After 5 minutes of processing, I rinse it and wash it. After it's been washed and dried, it's time to make it into a spiral again. I'm a little nervous about spiraling it again because it was kind of tricky the first time. I'm using a hemostat in the middle of the spiral instead of a fork like last time, so I'm hoping this will make it a little easier. Other than the cleanup factor, I think one of the most time-consuming parts of tie-dye is probably the folding. I'm trying to fold the spiral as tight as possible while also trying to keep all of the pleats the same height. I add a rubber band or two before I remove the hemostat. A rookie mistake that I've made on several occasions is I will remove the fork or the hemostat from the center before I have rubber bands on it. Since most of my clothing is black, I've decided to go with a bright rainbow color palette. I'm working with Procyon dye, which is a fiber reactive dye. And on this shirt, I'm using a dye under ice technique. I've also placed the shirt on a cooling rack, which is raised by some glasses. The water from the ice melting will be able to drip down into the bottom of the bin. I'm also being pretty generous with the Procyon dye since this shirt is folded pretty thick and I want to make sure the color goes all the way through to the other side. Because the shirt is pretty thick, I ended up doing several batches of ice over the course of 72 hours. After several batches of ice and a couple days, this is what it looked like before I rinsed it out. After a good rinse, I washed this in textile detergent. The textile detergent is magical and it removes any loose dye that Then after that, the next thing I wanted to learn how to do was how to make a galaxy shirt. So I started experimenting with different ways to make galaxy shirts. And because I'm a nerd, I was looking at National Geographic photos and all of the telescopes that are in outer space so that I could try to make my galaxy dyes as realistic as possible. And I started experimenting with different layers of ice dye, and then I started experimenting with using bleach as the stars and to sort of create these effects with the galaxies. And they ended up turning out really cool. They were pretty labor intensive, but at that point, it was COVID, and other than work and school, which took up like at least 12 to 15 hours of our day, this was like the one thing I got to do that was not depressing. This is how I made this dress. Take two. About a month ago, I tried to make a similar dress, but I just didn't like how the colors turned out. So I'm trying this again. This time, I'm going to try only wrapping part of the bottom, and I've already picked out the colors I want to use. After I wrap it with synthetic sinew, I'm going to remove the color using Out White Bright. As I've worked with Out White Bright, it's really important that the water is boiling. I did the Out White Bright process twice because I wanted to make sure that I really removed all of the color. I rinsed it out really well and put it on the spin cycle in my washer. Since I didn't do a soda ash soak, I am going to just put the soda ash right on top of the fabric before I start putting the dye on. For colors, I used flamingo pink, amethyst, blue violet, hydrangea, peacock blue, and celadon. I also decided I wanted to do this ice dye in the muck. That means I'm going to let the ice melt into a big pool, and I'm going to let it sit for at least 24 hours. It's taken me a while to get used to dyeing in the muck, but now I absolutely love it. Something magical happens. It's sort of like a tie-dye marinade, and so far I have not been disappointed. After it sat for 24 hours, I'm able to rinse it out and start unwrapping it. Once it's unwrapped and thoroughly rinsed, I can put it in my washer with a textile detergent. This removes any remaining loose dye particles. And you guys, she turned out so lovely. I will be making lots more of these. And so after I started learning how to do reverse dye, it was like a whole nother world again opened up for me with the dye. And I started going to the thrift stores a lot more so I could find items that were not super expensive and were not fast fashion. Every week, my friends also who were going to the thrift store, they would send me photos and say, hey, do you want this for your tie-dye? And I would say yes. And it was wonderful. And I had like an endless supply. That's the time that I also started spending lots of time with other local eco-minded business owners and makers. And that's when I really started to learn more about the ethics. I grew up here in Minnesota, and my parents and grandparents really demonstrated that when something breaks or needs mending, that we fix it. And we use something until it cannot be used anymore. Growing up, my mom and some of my grandparents knew how to sew. So my mom actually made us a lot of our clothing. And my mom was very frugal with the clothing. If she made herself, a shirt or something, she would save all of the scraps. And a lot of times when my sister and I were little, she was able to make like a sundress or a pair of shorts out of the scraps. So we grew up wearing clothing that was not fast fashion. We did also grow up with some fast fashion. I recently learned that there is currently on Earth enough clothing to last 6 generations. I cannot even trace back my family 6 generations. I always grew up being aware of the sweatshops and the horrible conditions that people were working in. And during that time, I really tried to switch to ethically sourced and made clothing that also came from more eco-friendly materials as well. During that post-COVID time, I really started learning about the impact of dyes and materials on the environment, the chemicals used in sizing material, the microplastics that were ending up in our water and are now in our bodies and in wildlife bodies. I also really took time to look into the amount of resources that it took to grow new cotton. I think one of the reasons I felt compelled to look into the fast fashion industry during that time is because I didn't make the connection of how much of an impact it really had on our environment in a similar way that food production has on the environment. One of the reasons I was vegetarian in high school is because I had learned about the impact of the resources that it takes to get meat. Fun fact, did you know it takes between about 250 to 1,300 gallons of water to grow 1 pound of cotton? And after learning how many resources it takes to make cotton, really made me feel a moral obligation to start using secondhand items that were already made and were going to end up in the landfills anyways. So, after I really made a decision that I was going to move towards using mostly upcycled items, that is when my business just exploded again. And when I really switched to using mostly upcycled materials, I found that people actually really liked that. And during that time, I started making a bunch of reverse dyed geo dresses. And this is actually an example of one. But I would go to the thrift store and I would find dresses that were still in really good condition. And I would reverse dye part of the dress and then I would ice dye over that. And I really think my geo dresses are what propelled my business forward, especially from an upcycling standpoint. And about a year ago, I also did a fashion show. I reached out to my friends and their kids, and everybody was super excited about being in this fashion show. Hello, friends. I wanted to tell you about the fashion show that I just did. I am so grateful that I had so many friends and family helping me out with this project. And a huge shout out to Make Culture for letting us use their space and for all their support in making this project happen. I wanted this fashion show to be able to showcase my work as a tie-dye artist while also representing my values for slow fashion while also celebrating all body types. I've been planning this fashion show for about 3 months, which includes the actual ice dyeing process for each of these pieces, multiple trips to the thrift store, having the models come in and do fittings for each of the pieces, and the washing and steaming of each of these items took me about 25 hours alone. Each of the models rocked the fashion show. It was so exciting to see each of my items in action. I gave free rein to the models that walked in the show, so each model could authentically choose which movements they wanted to do in the pieces that they were wearing. I often feel the fashion world isn't a real authentic representation of regular people, and I want you to know that any of my pieces that I make are intended for anyone. Using thrifted items, some of which even had stains on them, I've been able to elevate these items as well as give them new purpose while also keeping them out of landfills. While only 80% of my items are generally upcycled, when you buy a tie-dyed piece from me, you're not only supporting a small business, but you are also supporting an artist that has the ability to use upcycled materials and keep them out of landfills. If you made it this far in the video, thank you so much for watching, and lots more exciting updates coming soon. Hit that and follow. When I did the fashion show, that's when I really decided that my upcycled clothing is not just for a specific body type, it's not for a specific gender, it's for anybody, and anybody can be wearing it. When somebody purchases a piece of my upcycled art that they're wearing, they are supporting a small local business. They are supporting a slow fashion industry where this piece of clothing is now not going into a landfill. They are also not supporting fast fashion who might have unethical processes to create their clothing, as well as a huge environmental impact with chemicals. And on top of that, when somebody is wearing a piece of my art, I literally cannot make another piece like that. Because my main method of dyeing uses ice dye, I cannot control how the ice is melting and pulling the dye into the fabric. Also, because I am getting my clothing supply from secondhand places, I will not necessarily ever be able to find this piece of clothing again. Are there cons to my business model? Yes. So, first of all, I go in person and look through all of the clothing in thrift stores and secondhand shops. And this is very time consuming. I can literally go through 1,000 clothing items and only find 20 items that will work for what I'm doing. There's a lot of factors that go into it. I have to look the item over to make sure it's not damaged in any way. I have to find the fiber content tag and make sure that it is natural fibers that will work with the dyes that I use. There's also a percentage of items that I will buy from a thrift store or secondhand store, and the dye won't remove. And usually in those cases, I will end up dyeing it anyways and then cut it up and turn it into headbands or scrunchies. All of these things are very time consuming. This is not a fast fashion industry. I don't have a bunch of unethically treated humans behind me that are able to pump out thousands of articles of clothing a day. On top of that, when I bring the clothing home to work with, I have to wash it in a strong textile detergent to remove sizing materials or any fabric softener or scented things that have been used. As a kid, I've always kind of been into the environment. We grew up with shows like Nova, which is a science show. They often featured lots of animals. We grew up with National Geographic magazines, which not only had a lot of articles about the environment, but a lot of articles about people around the world. I think for me as a kid, that's where I really started to make connections between our consumer world here in the US versus what other people are living like in other countries. Also, when I was a child, I used to play with the kids in my neighborhood, and we made a Help Save the Earth club. And I say it like this because we didn't really do much. Uh, But one of the things that we did do is I remember once we made signs that said help save the earth, and we like held them up, and in our like sort of quiet little neighborhood, anytime a car would drive by, we would grab our signs and like help save the earth and like chant that, which I think is hilarious. And I'm sure people were like, whose kids are those? I guess you could say we were taking action, but I don't think I really knew what that meant at that time. My cousins always gave me their hand-me-downs, and honestly, they were so fun. And, when I was a little kid, I thought it was so cool that I was wearing my older cool cousins' clothing. So for me, it wasn't, like, oh no, these are hand-me-downs. It was very exciting for me. I went to college here in Minnesota, and I think for me, that was the most mind-opening time of my life. Being a violinist, I went to school to learn how to become an orchestra director, and I eventually became a high school orchestra teacher. So, a couple years before COVID, I actually left my teaching job to live a much slower pace life. And my husband and I actually moved into an intentional community. So, we actually live in co housing, which means that we each have our own private space that we own. And then we have a lot of common spaces that we share with our neighbors. And when I moved here, one of my neighbors really opened my eyes to the world of fast fashion. One of my neighbors had just opened up their own business where they took old clothing, cut them up, and sewed them into dresses. And then my microphone died. I am very proud to say that over 90% of my ice dyed clothing items are now acquired by upcycled and secondhand means. Deepest gratitude to Amber at Handmade Seller Magazine for putting together the Eco Conscious Artisan Talk. Thanks for watching, and here's one last video. Hey friends, welcome to Madmere Dye. A while back, one of my friends reached out to me and asked if I could make her boyfriend's sentimental band shirt a different color. He didn't want to wear it because it's the color tan, but he didn't want to get rid of it either because it's sentimental. So I thought a good color for this would be browns. I really like working with neutral colors, and I welcomed an opportunity to try out some neutral colors with tie-dye. Along with the browns and neutrals, I also used a little bit of a marigold color and an amber waves, which is like a light marigold color. The colors work really well together, and I'll definitely be using this combination again. I'll be using a dye under ice and a dye over ice method. I randomly placed the colors, trying not to get like colors next to each other, and then I covered the whole thing with a lot of ice. It's important to have enough ice so that all of the dye that's both under the ice and will be over the ice will be able to pull through the fabric as the ice melts. I'll be mixing in a little bit of soda ash on the top, as the soda ash helps the fabric maintain the correct pH for the dyes to stick to the fibers. I add more Procyan dye to the top, and this will leave a watercolor effect unlike the dye that's under the ice, which will leave a more vibrant base color. After I'm done putting the rest of the dye on top and another layer of soda ash, I have to let this sit and batch for 24 hours before I can wash it out and dry it and steam it. The hardest part is waiting, but this shirt turned out so cool, you guys. Here it is. I was worried the browns might turn out too heavy and opaque, but the dye on ice really added some great dimension.